Hello everyone. Today's video follows the previous one on how to photo bash. We will see on this one how you can remove the background of any images in Photoshop. First and foremost, let's start with the most important. For your background removal, I will always advise you to take good quality photo with high resolution and good contrast on the elements you want to cut out. Otherwise, you will have to paint over it and it will take a long time. Let's start simple. First, import your image, and I advise you to duplicate it. This will allow you to have a reference that you haven't touched and can go back to. On the duplicated image, create a layer mask, which is the small icon at the bottom. Click on this layer mask, and here is what we're going to do. Use the brush to paint in pure black to make the image disappear. I found the Photoshop transparent background not ideal for this, which is why I created a solid natural grey background. What's great about layer mask is that all you need to do is paint in pure white to quickly make the image reappear. In the case of simple shapes, like in this example, you can use Photoshop's automatic selection tool. It always works the same way. A left click adds to the selection, and alt click subtract from the selection. If you press Q on your keyboard, after making a selection, you will have a visual representation of the selection in red. The parts in red are what you didn't select, and the normal color is what's selected. In this mode, you can paint like you would with a layer mask. By painting in white, you add to the selection, and by painting in black, you subtract from the selection. Here, I choose to reduce selection with the pen tool. If you wish, you can add a feather, which means that instead of having hard lines, you will have a gradual blur on the edge of your selection, which will make it look softer. Then you press Add Delete, which allows you to delete from your selection. I now have the edges of the skyscraper selected, and I just need to press Q to go back to the normal mode. I create a layer mask, tap Delete again, and it removes the edges of my skyscraper. I clean everything with a lasso tool and it's done. Now let's move to something a bit more complex. This image is far from an ideal image because it's already blurry, the hair both burnt and overexposed, the background is bright, and this woman has too much hair for sure. So for this example, we're gonna use the quick selection tool. Click on select the subject, and the software is already making you like a quick selection, already quite good for what it is. By the way, my Photoshop is in French, so hopefully I got the English name of the tool right. Just like in the previous example, I put a grey background image because it will help me to see exactly what's selected, and also I can use the onion skin mode. The result is already okay, but because the image is bad, we end up with yellow burnt hair places that blend in with the background, so we lose the detail we were looking for in the first place. What is really important is that the quality and how much you have to isolate your subject will really depend on the background you will put your subject on. So if you are in a hurry, or if the background doesn't require very precise masking, you can, for example, press Improve Hair, which will slightly improve your selection, or you can use the Refine Edge brush. It works very simply. You're going to do a left click and hold where the hair is good, and while still holding it, you're going to go slightly outside the edges where I think there are other hairs. The software will understand that you wanted to add this and will add it to the selection. As it is for an example, I will show you how to do something a little more advanced, a little more perfect, but as I said, in 90% of the cases, it's not necessary. After clicking OK, I end up with a layer mask and my selection inside. In my case, the background is grey, so we need to get rid of all this relighting in the hair that came with the white background. To do that, I duplicate my layer and I put it in multiply mode. Then I create a layer mask as I showed you in the first example, and I will only paint in areas that are relighted to correct this overly bright side. Once I've done that, you can also see that there is a lot of yellow in this hair. it doesn't come from the color of the hair, but from the color of the background reference. And it's a stain that I want to remove because my background is gray, so I need to get rid of this yellow color. To do that, I use a hue saturation tool and select the yellow. Then, as my final background will be gray, I just have to remove all the saturation. And now come the most laborious and final part, which will allow you to have something perfect. It's the repaint. There are several methods to do this. The first one you can try is the clone tool. I create a new layer and I put it just above the layer with the layer mask. I want to create a link, which means that everything I do on my new layer will be restricted to my layer below it. And to do this, simply hold down the Alt key and put your mouse between the new layer and the one below it. You will see an arrow. Then hold down Alt and click to link the two layers. Now I can start. So using the clone tool, I sample something close. And I will repaint everything that is less successful in my selection. It's almost always the edge of the selection that are the problem. This will allow me to go back to all the pixels that are either too white or too yellow in my case. And now we have something quite advanced in terms of selection. There is only one step left if you want it, is literally repaint. Because it's never perfect, and depending on your requirement, you will have to go through this step anyway. I take my favorite brush that I talked about in the previous video, and I literally repaint my hair. Generally, what I do is that with the eyedropper, I take an average hair color for the dark, mid and bright tones. I only did a small part to show you, because it's really a tedious job that doesn't necessarily need to be done. This can be done for product design, for example, or something that needs to be really perfect. Now it's time to move on to what interests us. How to combine all these possibilities to be able to mask and remove the background of absolutely everything you want, and to show you that everything can be selected and isolated. I choose a really complex image. It's slightly blurry, with a dominant of blue and a lot of details that are completely blend with the sky. This promises to be a tedious job, but at least you know that if we can do this, we can do absolutely everything. So to isolate the boat, the first step will be to look at the channel. Which of the red, green and blue channel offer me the most contrast compared to the background? I choose the blue channel because my sky is blue, so it's almost completely white, while the boat, made up of other color, appears to be more black. I copy the blue channel to a new layer and use levels to make the contrast even more, to get more blacks on my boat and more white in the background. You don't want to contrast too much because otherwise you will destroy your edges. However, you can ignore all the small details of the cables and focus on them at the end during the repaint step. As with the previous example, I take the quick selection tool and click on select subject. Thanks to the strong contrast we just created, the software will be able to determine the subject from the background more easily. I will now refine the selection using the quick selection tool by just clicking on the left button to add to the selection and using the Alt click to subtract from it. Keep in mind that everything I'm doing is just an example of what you can do. Don't follow it precisely, as each cases may be different. But the goal here is to show you as many techniques as possible, so you can apply them to your own specific cases. Once I have completed my rough selection, I will just apply a layer mask on my selection. I always prefer using layer mask rather than deleting pixel, because it allows us to make changes without ever losing the original pixel. You already got a glimpse of the usefulness of the layer mask, because I decided to go back as I thought I had destroyed some edge too much. Then with a curve tool, I increased the contrast of this image. Something we haven't seen yet is the burn and dodge tool, which allow us to modify the darkness and brightness of specific areas. Burn, for example, will be useful to make area darker. Dodge is the opposite. You can change the range that is affecting your tool, For example, here I am making my boat darker. This won't affect anything else than the boat since the tool is targeting only the mid-range tones. The goal of this step is to make the subject even darker and the background even brighter, which will facilitate the next step. Afterward, for the large area, it's easy to do. You just take a solid black and paint it with a large brush, that's it. The same goes for white. I almost have a maximum contrast with my background in pure white and my subject in black. The next step is that I copy this black and white image in a new layer mask. Your mask will be inverted because what is black is removed, so to invert it again, just press Ctrl+I on your keyboard. And we already have a good base. What we have left to do is just to refine the selection. My first step will be to paint directly on the mask all the elements that have disappeared, and I would like to retrieve. Don't be too precise with this step because it's clearly the longest part of the work, so focus on the big area. I do the same thing for the things I want to remove. I paint them black in my mask. You can use the pen tool if it's more useful to you. It's exactly the same thing. The only thing that matters is the result. This is clearly the longest part of the work, so I will fast forward to avoid you suffering. But take your time, it's important for your final results. As I have a grey background, just like in the previous example with the hair, you need to neutralize the color of the sky that no longer belong there on a grey background. So I had to use saturation, select blue tones and desaturate them. If you want to put this boat on sand or a yellow background, then you have to change the blue for yellow and so on. Here is an example with a colored background to show you the dominant color of your image depends simply on your background, whether it's the sky in a real photo or not. Now for the boring part, because you have to repaint all this cable and it's definitely not an easy task. Some of them are only 1 pixel wide and they are mixed with the background and the sky. You will end up with a blue pixel instead of the desired cable color. So I have no other solution but to repaint them carefully with a very fine brush by sampling the color you want. It was very tedious because the subject was very complex. And I spent 19% of my time just painting cables, but that's what I would like to finish with. Always preserve your mental health by selecting a good image from the start. Once you have your image, depending on your background, it can be really quick. You don't have to paint every tiny detail pixel by pixel. If your picture is already good for an integration with the background and just need a color correction, then it's good, no need to overthink it. Only the results matter. So remember that in any cases, whatever your project is, your time of work can be reduced a lot by the quality of your research, references and reflection that you add before it's even started.